And it looks like we're live. So welcome back to Questing Beast. And today I am here with River Horse Games. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello. They are the ones that created and are publishing the Labyrinth role-playing game, which I wrote most of the adventure of. But this is a project masterminded by these two, and they're going to be publishing it. They created the rules. And yeah, I just wanted to do a quick interview to get a sense from where they're coming from and where they want to go with Labyrinth and with their other games. And if you want to hear the other half of this interview, which they did with me, you can head over to their channel. I'll put a link down in the description. So Chris and Jack, when did you start making games? Because it seems like you've been making games for a long time. I hadn't really run into River Horse apart from hearing about the Friendship is Magic from I'd heard of that. I knew there was a My Little Pony role-playing game, but I had not heard of River Horse apart from that. So can you tell me where you guys started from?
Well, so River Horse itself, I believe, started in 2010, and sort of the CEO, Alessio Cavatore, basically his way of getting his games out there and his own sort of ideas. We've mostly been doing board games and sort of miniatures games, working a lot with licensed things. We sort of know what we're doing when it comes to handling licenses. Done the Highlander game, the Hunger Games, the Terminator, and of course, as you say, the My Little Pony role-playing game. And that was our first dive into role-playing games as a company. Personally, been doing sort of stuff off and on and casually, but the Tales of Equestria sort of thing was our first sort of dive into that, and it's been really, really rewarding actually, and really interesting sort of scene getting into that.
Did you write Tales of Equestria? Was it you and Alessio?
Yeah, I did a lot of the rules on Tales of Equestria. And and so like moving on from that and from the sort of success we've had with the Labyrinth board game, Labyrinth RPG seemed like a really a good idea to be the next one.
Yeah, it is a property that seems uniquely suited to being a role-playing game, right? More than most other movie franchises that I can think of. But have you been doing game design for a long time, even before starting River Horse?
Well, it depends on what you classify, because we've probably been doing it since we were 10.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
But not professionally.
We basically invented our own role-playing system very early on, that only the two of us knew the rules to, and then exclusively played that. And in fact, it was funny because when I first met Alessio, the CEO, he wrote the Lord of the Rings war game for Games Workshop a long time ago, back when we were actually kids. And we played it, but obviously because we were kids, we were like, nah, we're going to make up the rules to this. So we rewrote his rules as kids.
That's crazy, because so it was the Lord of the Rings battle game, right? Yeah, the Games Workshop one.
Yeah.
That was the first war game that I ever played too.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and I did something really similar where me and my friends were having these giant battles with it, and I started rewriting the rules. So I think that was the first war game rules that I ever tried to come up with. So that's really cool.
I'm sure he'll love to hear that we've just
everyone redesigned his rules.
Yeah, we've thrown out.
But, yeah, and it's sort of
it's funny that you now professionally rewrite his rules as well, and vice versa.
Yeah, I remember we actually got thrown out of Warhammer World because we were playing our own game, sort of on one of the tables.
Yeah.
Some guy sort of came over and was like, "This isn't sanctioned. This is not allowed."
Yeah.
You're playing with made up models and made up rules. Well, all rules are made up, but no. I remember feeling that was a breach of my rights as a citizen.
In hindsight, probably less so.
Fair enough, really.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not super into war games anymore, but like I've recently discovered the like Inquisition 28 scene. I don't know if you've seen that. Those people are crazy and just coming up with their own rules and like just horrifically modifying all of the characters. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of based on Necromonger, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like little war bands. Yeah.
Yeah.
That stuff is great. So you guys are in Nottingham, right? So my impression as an American is that like Nottingham is like the gaming center of the UK. Is that correct?
That's pretty true, really. And it is in many ways because of Games Workshop, which is obviously a big player. And a lot of people sort of in the industry around here, it's, you know, oh, you worked for Games Workshop like everyone else.
I mean, I couldn't, if I threw a rock out of that window over there, I would almost certainly hit one of 6 companies started, I think, by people who are ex-Games Workshop, all in the same trading estate. Like that.
Yeah, it's what is it? Alessio calls it the lead belt, sort of like the gold belt or something. It's but lead miniatures. And there's tons of games companies around here, which is really cool for sort of collaboration and getting into. Oh, we've got this idea for a game, but actually, you know, we need some help with this part of it and this part of it, and just that communication is really good around here.
Yeah, I imagine that'd be a huge advantage to actually have a community to go to like that, all in one city. That's probably not too common other places.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, is there a particular kind of game that you enjoy making? Do you like doing role-playing games more than board games, or is it all just kind of the same?
I love doing role-playing games. I often run out of steam when it comes to the sort of actual the world building and the fluff. But I love messing around with systems that allow people to tell stories, or systems that tell a story themselves. I really like, my favorite moment in any game is when a mechanic tells a story. You know, you discarded 3 cards from your hand, and those were your sort of allies because you took damage, and the story being told is that your friends have just been, you know, carted off, or and that sort of, when that all works well, I think, you know, theme tying into mechanics and then mechanics tying into theme, I think that's a lot of where roleplay sort of lies, that sort of that world. If your mechanics aren't sort of helping you to tell a story, then it's sort of, why are they there? And vice versa. If your story is sort of, I enjoy, for example, I enjoy Fiasco, but I find it quite difficult personally to play because it is so freeform, and the mechanics there are very, very light, and it's sort of more about improv. So
is that the one with Friend Computer?
No, that's Paranoia.
Oh, okay.
I've made some Paranoia. No, it's so it's a game where you sort of roll on some random tables for the setting, and then you sort of do a load of improv scenes to sort of work out what the story is.
I found that incredibly stressful. Yeah, I did not enjoy that at all.
That was my exact same experience with Fiasco. I think I watched the interview, it was the playthrough with Will Wheaton on Tabletop where he played Fiasco,
yes.
Right? And then it worked really well and it seemed to flow. I'm like, oh, this looks great. And then, incredibly stressful because the whole game is just like, it has this giant spotlight and it's like, now it's on you. Like, do something cool. And you're like, like
if I'm playing D&D and the spotlight's on me, I can just be like, oh, okay, I'll do a task that takes a few minutes. I'll search this corner. Yeah, give me some time to think. Or ask other people. But that felt
well, and often you've got the mechanics of the game that are informing you what just happened and what your goals are. So the orc is bearing down on you, and you know he has 30 hit points, and that, you know, it's a massive attack. So you have something sort of informing you what your options are. Whereas I think in free-form role-playing, that can be quite difficult for some players.
So how did you come up with the underlying structure for Labyrinth, which is, I think, pretty interesting and unique as far as RPGs go?
So I wanted to come up with something that could. I spent a long time trying to work out who the target market are, right? So the target market, the people I didn't want to alienate were the Labyrinth fans. Obviously, I want to make something that is for all role players that can dive in at any level. But to create something that was, that didn't alienate the people who were a fan of the franchise was kind of the key inspiration. And then so I wanted something that, because like for me, sitting down for 4 hours and playing a role-playing game of make-believe, that's like a normal thing to do, right? But if you're not into role-playing games, that's a really long time to like find 4 hours where you don't have to take the kids to school and you don't have to, go to bed early to get up for work the next day or whatever. Like there's a lot of things that get in the way of that kind of binge gaming. So I wanted something that was that felt a bit more kind of
discreet, sort of you could do it in small pieces.
Yeah, you could do it in small pieces of an evening and sit down, open the book, maybe run a couple of scenes. The idea was really to trick people into becoming hardcore RPG players, because like I think if anyone sits down and plays 2 or 3 little scenes, they'll get really into it and they're suddenly attached to a make-believe character and they're really invested in where they're going and what they're doing, and then they can't wait to come back the next week. So yeah. And also I wanted to mimic the way that the Labyrinth shifts. Like, I think the most iconic bit in terms of it being like a dungeon, like you were saying, for me, is where she runs down a corridor one way and then they move the walls behind her, and then she goes down a corridor the other way, and she goes into a new room. And what that is that's how dungeon masters rearrange the interesting rooms around the players all the time, right? The players are going to go through the left door, and you're like, I haven't prepared what's through the left door. I'll tell you what, I'll put what's in the right door. But I like that the Labyrinth does this naturally, kind of like as part of, I guess because Jareth is the dungeon master.
He is the games master, yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of where that came from.
Yeah, and that sort of informed sort of the product. One of the sort of guiding points of it was it had to be a boutique, sort of complete experience. So somebody who never done anything with role-playing had to be able to pick this up, play it, finish it, absolutely everything.
Well, maybe play it again. Like if I've played through it with one group of friends and I want to run it again, or even like I like that the same player could run the Labyrinth twice as 2 different player characters, and it would just feel like you were going through at a different time, or you were going through at a different kind of, because of all the tables and the randomness built in, you're going through the same location but with this kind of changing backdrop, which I thought was cool, because why not,
Yeah, it adds so much replayability. It reminds me of a couple of products from like the OSR. I think like Emmy Allen did one like the Gardens of Yin, which is similar, where you're exploring this sort of fantasy garden, but it's constantly rearranging itself. So having like these self-generating campaigns just adds so much more value to the game, because it's not a one-shot thing where you've gone through it and you're done. Replaying again would be pointless because you'll see the same things. Yeah. And the sense,
I like this idea of, sorry, I was just going to say, I like the idea of the scenes rubbing up against each other. So like, I think there's one where you're in a giant cistern that you wrote, and you pull a plug out, and it's like, in the next scene, there's going to be like 1 million tons of water. It's just like, yeah. And then you start thinking like, oh, okay, so the next scene could be, entirely submerged, or how does that change the next thing?
Yeah, I really started thinking about that while I was revising it, because I went back through and not only was I rewriting the scenes, I was rearranging them. And I started thinking about the scenes that had a lot of impact on later scenes. And I tried to like put them in the correct order so that the scenes that they would affect would do like maximum damage, would cause the most havoc, so that things would snowball, and your actions would have greater effects down the line.
I think that's an interesting component. Like there were a lot of things that we wanted to teach new role players as they kind of explored, and I think teaching them that their actions have consequences is one of the biggest things about a role-playing game that makes it different from a board game. A board game dungeon crawler is in many ways very similar to a kind of old D&D game, but because it's a board game, there's no kind of repercussions. And I think that allowing the role play to create that kind of thing it's really interesting.
Yeah, another fascinating thing about Labyrinth that I haven't seen before is the way that the whole campaign kind of has a fail state, right? You have to get everything done in 13 hours. So you can lose, but then you can go back to the beginning and try again. So it's almost like, video games doing like speed runs, where it's like how fast and how deep can you get into it, but everything's going to shift around and be different every time. And I love that idea because I've never really seen that before, I don't think.
So I find it really useful in role-playing games just generally as a DM to just throw time constraints at people. Because I find like sometimes you'll get a party and they'll go 3 rooms and then 2 of them will be like, I really need to take a 1-hour nap now. We all cool with just pitoning the doors shut and I'll kip on the floor. And like, if they've only got 1 hour to stop the summoning circle, like I really like the moment in Watchmen where they get to the end and they show up and Ozymandias is like, oh, you're late. I wouldn't be explaining my plan to you if I hadn't already won. And so I like the idea that even if it's like a little dungeon, goblins have kidnapped someone they're going to sacrifice, put a hard time on that, like let them, because if the time remains ethereal, you often end up with players actually take like 20 hours to get somewhere and it doesn't feel like any time's passed because nobody's discussed the time issue. Anyway.
Something you touched on there, the fail state as well. Something I've found like with our sort of playtest group is they'll ask about, because it's Labyrinth. It's about messing about, and sort of very soon they find out that they've lost 5 hours and they haven't exited the first sort of quarter of the book. At this rate, this isn't going to work, and it really sort of opens a player's eyes without, so because it's this, everything's pretty much fine until you close the book. You're never sort of punishing individual players. You're never sort of you can't interact with this game anymore because you've had an arm chopped off or a wasting disease, or you're on 2 hit points, or anything like that, because basically everything, it's a completely cooperative game, of course. Everything is sort of affecting everything else.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you can get better at it. Like you can have a first run through, realize that you've lost half your time, you're still in the first chapter, and then peter out, but then realize, okay, I see what mistakes I made, and then on the second run through, find ways to avoid losing time, and just like watch yourself get better and better as you hopefully get further into the Labyrinth.
I think that's where the random tables sort of come in. Is it means that you can never be certain. You can never be, oh, we did this last time and that guy's a traitor, so we're gonna ignore him because actually this time maybe he's not. The dice always sort of help the GM come up with changes every time. Yeah,
absolutely. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is your layout and design for Labyrinth, because there's a lot of interesting things going on in there, especially stuff like having the dice inside the book is really cool, and just all the things that you're doing to make it a really high quality product that really stands out. I don't know if you want to talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah. So I think without trying to work out a way of phrasing this without being like a super high and mighty statement, but I think that when you're writing an adventure for someone else to DM, you're kind of their DM. Like the book writer and also like everyone involved in that is working together to create something that when you sit with it in front of you feels like it puts you in the mood to be in that adventure. I think that's something the OSR does really well, is creating these lovely little kind of they feel like vibrant epic adventure books, like your leather-bound copy of Lord of the Rings on the shelf, or and I think that's a really good way of putting the DM in the headspace of reading taking them on a journey. So I wanted the Labyrinth to feel like a book that wouldn't be out of place if you picked it up in the Labyrinth. So obviously the exterior looks like Sarah's book from the movie. You've got a crude
I do.
mock-up
It's such a crude mock-up. I'm not sure whether to.
Literally just got sent photos of like the embossed thing.
Sort of that, that book.
Yeah,
That's but much better.
Yeah, and the holes mostly came from. I didn't want to create a product that required an ancillary product because, like I was saying, it's for people. A lot of Labyrinth fans probably don't play role-playing games, so they probably don't own a poly set. And a poly set is a weird thing to send someone to go and buy who has no idea what it is or where to get one. Like, it seems incredibly normal to us. Like, and also, like, yeah, the triangles have got four points to it, and the million decahedron has has 20 sides. So I figured something D6 is the system because everyone knows what a 6-sided dice is. That when you say dice, most people who aren't role players will immediately see a cube in their head. And them coming inside the book was because I think the book should be able to live on your shelf with all your other nice fantasy books, because that's probably why you bought it. And it should be able to contain everything you need. So we drilled holes in it, basically.
Yeah, it looks great. That's been one of the things that I put pictures of it up on Twitter, and that was one of the most exciting things that people pointed out about it, because I haven't seen any other books that do that. That the dice go in the book, sets it apart immediately.
I spent a really long time with an embargo on being able to tell anyone that I was going to put holes in this book, because I was like, the idea and the confirmation that the factory could do it were months apart. And so I'm like walking around for months like, I want to tell someone it's cool.
Yeah, and I love the way that the book, there's a whole like meta-fictional element to the whole Labyrinth RPG. Because not only does it look like a book from the movie, but there's other things that, like, the game master is the Goblin King. And it's not totally clear whether like Goblin King is just like the term we're using for game master, or if that person is literally playing the Goblin King in the book. And like those things are just sort of like merged together.
Yeah, and that's sort of,
Yeah, so like there's that, and I tried to write a couple of scenes that add this metafictional element where like the players are actively involved in it, or like things in the real world and the game world start merging with each other. And I think that's really cool because that's another unique thing.
Yeah, something I think is there's a cool touch where it's kind of suggested by the kind of the introduction to the Goblin King thing. In fact, the Goblin King has his own sheet, like a character sheet, which is actually a way of informing new dungeon masters that you're going to have to take a lot of notes. So it's got little sections for all of the notes and stuff. I think it also has a name and a kin section. So yeah, if you are creating a Goblin King, there's no reason it has to be Jareth, or you can play Jareth.
I think there'll be a lot of Jareths.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who really want to play Jareth. That was my impression from Twitter.
So 4 Jareths enter the Labyrinth because Jareth has stolen Jareth and will turn him into a goblin.
All right. Last question. I've looked through your catalog. You guys do a lot of really interesting licensed games, but do you guys have any ideas or dream projects that aren't licensed games that you would like to do someday?
We've definitely got a lot of stuff that was always sort of there that we're looking forward to. I personally enjoy. So a long time ago, I ran a Kickstarter about basically so it's a board game where you take control of a band of mercenaries and you fight a giant monster, sort of Attack on Titan sort of sized beasts. And each game is basically just people getting crushed and flung about and destroyed like willy-nilly. So you don't really have hit points. Your characters just die, and sort of really recreating that sort of feeling of huge stompy monster sort of boss fight. which actually came about from playing sort of Pathfinder and D&D, and that feeling that something they've never managed to quite do for me in the rules is get the feeling of a big monster. It always just has a lot of numbers, and so this whole sort of monster fighting sort of simulator, and it's something that Kingdom Death has managed to do really well, actually, that feeling of this big monster. So that's one that's always on the back burner for me, and one I really look forward to someday messing about with.
I started writing a kind of system agnostic role play like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Which, and part of my problem is that my job and my hobby are actually doing the same thing. Like I literally get to the end of the day and I'm like, right, I'll stop doing like layout and graphics and stuff and close my laptop, walk home, open a different laptop and just start again. But yeah, I've always got several things on the kind of on the side burner. And I think dream project probably would be to make something like similar to the Labyrinth adventure game, but to kind of probably utilize the freedom of not being attached to an IP to do something proper mental. Really like, yeah.
Well, that sounds really cool. Thanks, you guys, for hanging out and talking about Riverhorse. And as I mentioned before, everyone watching this, you can head over to Riverhorse's channel and see the other half of this interview where they ask me questions. So thanks a lot for coming. Sorry?
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. See you guys later.
Bye.